the 16th of October 2022. I'm your host, Dana Durnford. I'm also known as the Nuclear Proctologist.org. You can call in at 709-589-4406. It's 709-589-4406. Everybody had a great weekend. We got lots and lots of news to get through. And we're just gonna dive right in. Not to a fuel pool, but dive right into the news. Your fuel pools are still splitting the atoms, which means your planet is being annihilated by emissions that last for millions of years, pulsing energy. Have you ever wanted to shake hands with Marie Curie? There's some bad news. Besides the fact she's dead, she lost both of her hands to radiation. These creatures gotta go. The International Atomic Energy Agency and United Nations. If you don't get rid of them, you'll lose your planet. You have to do everything in your power to stop this evil, disgusting industry known as United Nations. George Bush Sr. calls them New World Order. Eisenhower called them the military-industrial complex. We call them evil, because that's what they are. I'll take you through some headlines so you can comprehend how much danger you're in. There's no safe level of man-made anthropogenic radionuclide exposure, whether from food, water, or other sources, period. There is no safe level, because a single atom gets in your body attacks it for the rest of your life with white blood cells and eventually builds a tumor around it, which that's true for all species that live long enough to develop the tumor. It has up to 1,800 other catastrophic diseases besides cancer. Fukushima fuel rods were melting 75 minutes after the tsunami. The reactor core was not covered with water 10 minutes after the power went out, which it should be an incredible warning to humanity that this is a technology that wasn't supposed to exist. Why not just make Ebola and release it into the environment? Right? You don't, because it's terrible, right? And so is nuclear. But nuclear is actually worse. Pyrophoric fire may have already occurred at the Fukushima Unit 4 fuel pool. The nuclear engineer, folks, doesn't know the difference. Explosions are possible due to the rods not being covered with water. It's not possible, it's a fact. So the building was originally 190 feet tall. That's the fuel pools. There's two of them at the very top and a reactor core. And the stump you see left over there, which is just a stump, there's nothing functional there, meant that it had happened, right? The Japanese ambassador wrote to the despicable UN Secretary General that it's no exaggeration to say the fate of the entire country of Japan and the entire planet Earth depends on the number 4 reactor. There was another reactor right alongside of it that was infinitely, obviously worse. This was a mixed oxide fuel facility. You can see it's completely gone, same as reactor 4. Nuclear engineer, enormous plutonium, amount of plutonium in number 4 spent fuel pools, around 1,800 pounds minimum of plutonium in each of the fuel pools. The pool is cracked and leaking. This is Arnie Gunnarsson I'm going to play for you, claiming TEPCO went in to what he called a structurally damaged reactor. It's not structurally damaged. This is a destroyed building. You don't need to be an engineer to understand that. But listen to an expert claiming they went under the fuel pools that don't even exist.
The Unit 4 was damaged twice. It was damaged by all of the earthquakes that occurred, and it was also damaged by a series of explosions over the first week or two of the accident. So the building is structurally weakened. Now, Tokyo Electric's acknowledged that. They went in May and June of last year. This is more than a year ago, and put an enormous number of extra structural supports directly under the fuel pool to keep the bottom of the pool from breaking through.
Okay, well, first off, the zero possibilities. You put an enormous amount of support under the reactor 4 fuel pool. Zero, because the fuel pool doesn't even exist. And it's not a crime for him to lie like that.
The division I ran built nuclear fuel racks for boiling water reactors exactly like Fukushima.
So he built the racks for the assemblies in that fuel pool, and he's claiming they're under the fuel pool, putting support on it when it doesn't even exist. And he's currently out there being put on a pedestal worldwide, telling these lies alongside of Helen Caldicott, who's doing the same thing. And Christopher Busby, of course. Japan Prime Minister to study setting up an alternative capital away from Tokyo. So it's kind of like if Ottawa, Canada has a nuclear meltdown, it's like saying Canada is considering setting up an alternative capital far away from Ottawa, and pick your country and apply the common sense. This stuff is not supposed to exist on your planet. This is 220 miles away. Japan considers moving capital away from Tokyo. So when they tell you about exclusion zones, you're talking to actual demons, propaganda machines, and lawyers. Radiation data from Seattle, America. Survey may be withheld by the feds for national security purposes. This is where they had a helicopter doing radiation surveys shortly after the plume showed up, and saying they can't release it, they're going to make it a national security purpose. They can't release, you paid for it, you gave them the authority and the equipment, and when it finally happens, they stab you and your loved ones to death with radiation and refuse to tell you. That's not an industry that we want on this planet. This is our planet, not the nuclear industries. They're going to have to be dealt with. You're going to have to deal with them, whether you like it or not. Radioactive rain caused 130 schools in Korea to close. Try wrapping your mind around it. Not typhoon, not cyclone, but radioactive fallout. Oh, Taiwan said people should stay home. If they're outdoors, immediately take off your clothes and cleanse the nuclear contaminant from your hair and your body by getting multiple showers. They also wanted you to bag your clothes and dispose of it. Hot radioactive particles in Seattle, by the way, were 50% of the levels seen in Tokyo. Geez, that why they decided not to release it because of, that was a different study, right? Unprecedented spike of 1,500 atoms of the radioactive sulfur peroxide hydrogen buckyballs per cubic meter detected in California was backed up by another study, tends to concentrate in the testicles. 360 atoms. This is true for animals and insects and birds and mammals and everything else, not just humans. Per day may be inhaled by Californians and everybody else in the northern hemisphere. Per day. And you're wondering why the species are disappeared. By the way, radiation health specialists, children with 11 becquerels a kilogram of cesium start to see heart problems. Well, imagine birds and mammals and animals that are smaller than children. Imagine how big of an impact the radioactive fallout is going to be on them. Irreversible heart damage for children with 50 becquerels a kilogram. And Canada removed all restrictions on food from the nuclear wasteland 93 days after it started. And 55 countries banned it for 14 prefectures for a decade. Not just Fukushima. So they couldn't ship it anywhere in Canada. And this is why everybody in Canada is currently sick. Because we've been poisoned, and particularly the children. Adults at 50 becquerels a kilogram leads to irreversible lesions in the vital organs. This is just one of hundreds of side effects that are immediately going to show up. This industry is not supposed to be on our planet. And the industry knows it. This is why they're so evil, and this is why they done the things they done. They want to kill the planet before you wake up and realize what they got done to you. Cesium-137 immediately damages the heart muscles. So it not only causes cancer, it causes heart problems. For instance, in one community, extreme increase in mortality by cardiac disease in Fukushima, that the death rates might give the creeps to some people. It was over 12,700 extra people died of heart attacks in a single month. A statistical significant increase. It's significant, it's catastrophic. And another thing that you should worry about was congenital heart diseases for children rose 14% per 100,000 live births, which means they got to have open heart surgery. For 100,000, it's over 14,200 children need open heart surgery, for goodness sakes, across the entire country. Unfortunately, it went around the entire planet. This is France's model of 16 days. When it stops, it's 16 days of radioactive fallout. So this is not just a Japanese thing. And if it's this bad worldwide, how bad is the food in Japan? Well, I already showed you, didn't I? The only way to preserve human life, the Nobel Prize winner on major media, is to completely turn away from degenerate nuclear power. Miko Kaku, a human civilization may destroy itself. The liquefaction of 3 nuclear reactor cores was 4 and 8 fuel pools, by the way. Major U.S. media time to quit nuclear power altogether. It threatens the very existence of human civilization. Leading director in Japan, nuclear power generation is the only invention that may destroy the future of humans. How many warnings do you actually need, I wonder? Tokyo legal expert, once a nuclear accident occurs, everything is over. All will be lost. This is the reality of nuclear energy. Irreversible heart damage. Irreversible. Look the word up if you're on a fence about this subject. Irreversible heart damage for children with a lousy 50 becquerels a kilogram. 1,000 years from now, contaminated water from Fukushima may be still entering the Pacific Ocean. It's necessary to monitor it. You don't need to monitor it. It's a catastrophe. Fukushima gives radiation meters to pregnant women and children in a nuclear wasteland rather than evacuate them. Now, that's all the fun news we got for tonight. How much did they increase my video? After 12 hours, my videos will increase. 2 hours, 26 seconds. 12 hours later, it was 2 hours and 30 seconds. So they only increased it 4 seconds? So they got new software they're putting into my video? Is that what's going on? Why did they change it from 6 seconds to 4 seconds, I wonder? Every one of my videos, it's 12 hours. Exactly, my videos will get longer. But nobody else's videos do that. The shocking video that explains the hidden flaw in nuclear fusion. They need tritium. There's only about 25 kilograms on the planet that's they're able to produce and store. Pre-nuclear industry, I can't remember the number, I shouldn't say it, I guess. I can probably look it up pretty quick and find it. Let me see if I can find it right quick. The pre-tritium sometimes you gotta type it in. Yeah, I don't know. That's the problem. I got so many folders and studies. Let me try it another way. Don't give up. Oh, I won't get it, I guess. My God, shocks me sometimes how many studies I got. Oh well, I can't win them all. It's fascinating. Let's keep going. Can't win them all. Let's get it on. Oh, another Chicago number. Hello. That's a stalker, eh? That's that stalker again. Isn't there something? Anyway, let's keep her going here. Yeah. Here we go again. So they don't have tritium for fusion reactors. That's TEPCO stalking me again. Well, let's keep her rolling here. Low-cost, zero-emission industrial heat and power. Rondo. So their idea of renewables is to use these bricks to use in the steel industry for heat. They can hold heat for extended periods. And then you have air that circulates around the bricks at 3,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures. And then the air, they need that hot air for industrial purposes. So it's a lot of energy typically to create it. And these bricks, you can use them for 100 years. There's nothing toxic. So it's really interesting. I wanted to put that out there in case people are looking for stuff like this. It was funded by Bill Gates, unfortunately. But nevertheless, the technology, anybody can replicate it. It's compatible with 90% of industrial processes and power needs. So you still got to heat the bricks, right? But they're so efficient, it's kind of like a hot water tank. Where you're not using the hot water, it's just maintaining the temperature. It's very efficient, right? Well, this is a different scale, but it's kind of the same principle for how they work it. Cold energy storage. Grid energy storage. So you can store energy as heat, obviously, right? This is another way. So you can use the bricks to back up renewables. You can heat the bricks, which are renewables. And when the sun's not shining or the wind's not blowing, then you have energy storage. Which reminds me, I'm going to put that where in my list of other storage. So that's a really interesting one, folks. It's a Bill Gates startup. But the principle is based on probably 100 plus years of smeltering steel. Incoming air is heated by the super heated bricks and piped to the same heat network already in place. So you can retrofit energy facilities with this stuff. The best one, of course, is geothermal. Just dig under any gas, oil, coal plant, tap into geothermal. So super interesting to see stuff like that. But it's good for energy storage too, long term. You know, like so wind and solar, it's a cheap and you can quickly have it up and running. You haven't got to wait. You haven't got to get a $500 million studies done first. Europe is still quietly importing Russia's nuclear energy. We got a poll tonight. Is calling nuclear power plants low carbon idiotic? And obviously the common sense is yes, it is idiotic. It's absurdly idiotic. You know, that call earlier, right? He's called me probably 1,000 times or more in the last decade. And I got 20 people on my show. It took me a whole decade to get 20 people, so don't laugh at me. I worked really hard for that 20 people. And 22 thumbs up. I do a couple hour, 5 days a week of these presentations. It's an absurd amount of work, and it paid off. I got 20 people on my show. If we're looking again, it'll probably be 19. Europe is still importing Russia's nuclear energy. This is how evil the nuclear energy industry actually is. The European sanctions, which is inflation, when your country has sanctions against a country that supplies you with a huge amount of commodities, that's going to be inflation the very next day. And if you're going to keep, as long as you got the sanctions, you're going to have inflation. Which, this is why they done this. This was done out, the whole thing is, Ukraine was sacrificed. On top of that, Ukraine was the biggest exporter of wheat worldwide. It's a nuclear wasteland for 36 years. That's the last spot that you should have, because that's a disease factory in overdrive, right? We've covered many, many studies about that. If you're not familiar, unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to cover it tonight. NATO annual nuclear exercise gets underway. Guess who it's with? Russia. Try wrapping your mind around that story. And NATO was created because of the Soviet Union, specifically and only for the Soviet Union. When the Soviet Union collapsed and everybody lost their pensions and patents of the country, NATO should have been dissolved. And instead, evil is almost impossible to get rid of. And this is what evil looks like. It's called NATO. There's another book out, The Untold Story of the Pacific Northwest Nuclear Past, Atomic Days. Why is it these people that are writing these books are not vocal? They're are not telling you the entire story when the story is well known. If you're, if how would you put it? If nuclear is one of your fortes, then you would know an awful lot about Hanford. One of the first things you might want to know about Hanford is that if you or your loved ones worked there for 8 hours, a single shift, even if you were just a day laborer snuck in there, you were entitled to a pension. Try wrapping your mind around that. If you work for single 8 hours at a 585 square mile site, you're entitled to a pension. Even if you don't get sick for decades and decades. And you don't have to prove that it made you sick. You just have to get sick decades after you worked there or the day after, whenever, right? So you talk about welcome to Hanford, home to estimated 53 million gallons. Well, first off, they dumped hundreds of billions of gallons in the soil in the 50s and 60s of sludge from chain reactions and chemical processes, reprocessing. This is absurdness, what I'm talking about. And what is it they talk about? 53 million gallons? 200 square miles of contaminated groundwater. That's a good one. 25 million cubic feet of spent nuclear fuel. 25 million cubic feet. 25 million cubic feet is 2.5 rows of traffic around the planet. Trucks, 1-ton trucks with a ton in the back of the pickup, bumper to bumper. Because a lot of the times when you talk about the fuel on the planet, they don't acknowledge the true extent. This is a staggering emission. And 200 square miles of contaminated groundwater. There's a spot on the Columbia River, downriver from Hanford, where it was 70 sieverts per hour on the shoreline, which means if you're in a boat drifting past that fission, you're going to die within a week or two. Or that day, even. On the river. Everything, like Hanford, was built on a slope, so it ran into the river, which runs down through all kinds of communities of millions of people and into the Pacific Ocean. There's so many stories like that with the nuclear industry. We're just talking North America. So the stories from India and Pakistan are just gut-wrenching and horrifying. Russia, of course, was just stunning how much they dumped. 18,000 dumps in the Arctic of nuclear waste in the ocean. Britain dumped it for 30 years. Every facet of this industry reeks of genocide and omnicides. Every facet of the industry is designed to exterminate the planet. Every freaking facet of it. If you've never heard of it before, you're not alone. Not too many people seem to know or care, which is 100% true. Though production ceased more than 30 years ago, the 586 square mile site remains one of the most toxic places in the world and is home to the most expensive environmental cleanup job the world has ever seen. The U.S. Department of Energy, which shouldn't exist because of their crimes against humanity, has sunk already $677 billion into the project of trying to clean it up. They estimate they're going to need at least another $700 billion for a single site that you can't clean up. You can only try to do the best you can. 600, the Department of Energy, which the crimes they committed against humanity are stunning. One contractor received the lion's share of the fund for the cleanup was the engineering firm Bechtel. It was created a long time ago and had a lot to do with the Manhattan Project. The name might be familiar. Bechtel made headlines for a series of blunders on major hospital construction in Basra, which is Iraq. They used so much depleted uranium in Basra that 80% of the women had deformed babies that didn't look like children, babies at all. The women there won't have babies anymore. Let's put it that way. It's so bad. During the occupation of Iraq, a congressional and oversight group later found less than half of the Bechtel's Iraq projects met their original objectives. The firm has become notorious for its questionable track record. Bechtel is 124 years old of evil. Its revenue is $17.5 billion a year. The 2000 Bolivia water privatization rate increase in violence. Bolivia had defaulted on the World Bank loan, which is what they hoped happened. Now they come looking for their pound of flesh. Bechtel wanted their water and took it. The Bechtel Consortium contract claimed harvesting rainwater violated its contract. So people weren't even allowed to harvest or to collect rainwater. That was Bechtel's too. In your country. Imagine that. Imagine how evil you got to be to think that way. Essentially monopolizing the supply of water to millions of people. Water became 1/50 average person's expenses. Imagine 1/50 of money each week has to go to fresh water. Protests erupted and were met with a cold shoulder response by Bechtel, who called in the police. expressing they would simply cut off water to those who did not pay. Further protests were enhanced when agricultural sectors realized the bylaw allowed Bechtel and a consortium the rights to rainwater as well, which was assumed to mean they could no longer collect the rainwater, which is exactly what it meant. Violence between protesters and police resulted in the burning of government buildings, is paid for by the taxpayers, and hundreds injured within the first day of the conflict. The contract was ultimately abandoned, for which Bechtel last year, 2021, demanded settlement. It's absurd, isn't it? And Bechtel was involved at Hanford since the start of the Manhattan Project, constructing buildings there and at a nuclear lab in no less than Los Alamos, New Mexico, which sits on one of the biggest aquifers in New Mexico, I might add. That's completely contaminated with radiation. Since then, among other things, the firm has been responsible for building a massive waste treatment plant to process the millions of gallons of radioactive waste buried in Hanford's underground tanks. It's the largest construction project in the United States with a price tag of $41 billion and climbing, decades behind. And it's estimated that, or it's assumed, or it's planned that if you finish it and start it up, you can never enter the building again. Full of radioactive material were installed in the 70s, were never built to last. And continue to age, and claiming that they sometimes leak, like the radiation pulls up. Nothing embodies the magnitude of the bumbling failures at Hanford more than the waste treatment plant. There's 41 miles of unlined trenches at Hanford where they dumped nuclear waste directly into the soil also. And it's illegal to have unlined trenches at your local dump. Now the reason, this is not a 1 million gallon tank obviously, right? These people are not protected in that environment on top of that. No one even knows what's in these tanks. And so when you put the kind of stuff we're talking about in these tanks, you have sludge on the bottom, which will mean you got a neutron source bombarding fission products, splitting atoms, which will create a criticality, a chain reaction. This will burn a hole through the tank and will lose the majority of its payload, but you still got a chain reaction. So the emissions coming out of the soil are frightening. So you might want to look up this article. Feds double down on Hanford's court ruling. To qualify for compensation, workers need only to be employed at a work area at Hanford for a single 8-hour shift. They took that all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court accepted that as law. That's the law. How a nuclear conflict could halt global air traffic is more fear-mongering. You know, they had nuclear wars on this planet multiple times. You call it nuclear testing. It's nuclear wars. It's the same bombs, the same radioactive fallout. It's actually worse because we're talking about megatons. The Soviet Union's biggest bomb was equal to 3,800 Nagasaki bombs going off at the same time. 3,800. It's equal to 1,900 bombs in nuclear Nagasaki-type bombs in Russia and 1,900 in China, and firing them all off at the same time at the same spot. That's a nuclear war, is it not? You got 1 million square kilometers in the Bikini Atolls that are off limits. 1 million square kilometers off limits. That's a nuclear war. The only thing that caused that is a nuclear war. You can call it nuclear testing all you want, but you're not being honest. And you can't address the issue by pretending it's not what it is. It's a nuclear war. So we didn't take the aircrafts out of the sky during the nuclear wars we've already had. The sun didn't disappear for decades. We didn't lose. Now, the fallout... Oh, I'm sorry. India finally got a nuclear submarine with a ballistic missile launches that work. So their submarines now can launch nuclear weapons from under the ocean, which is something they're not going to do, which is a huge waste of precious metal and resources and money that the country doesn't have. It's so stupid it defies logic that they even exist. Anti-nuclear campaigners raise fear about a UK mini-nuclear test bid planned. Why do they gotta make the name so difficult to pronounce? How the hell do you pronounce something like that? They speak English, for God's sakes, then speak English. Anti-nuclear campaigners have raised fear about a plan to turn whatever the frig that's supposed to be into a test bed for a nuclear generation, a new generation of this Rolls-Royce in the United Kingdom. They don't even have an approved design, for God's sakes. They don't have environmental impact studies done. They don't have an actual reactor, let alone it on paper. And what that means is you're talking 20 or 30 years down the road for it to come to fruition. So you're going to tie up the future with something that doesn't exist rather than come up with solutions. The industry doesn't know how to do anything but be evil. It destroys everything else. Nothing else can exist with nuclear. Nuclear is the atomic plague. The Nuclear Decommissioning Authority, which owns the nuclear plant, the Nuclear Decommission Authority in the United Kingdom, which has never decommissioned a single plant. Well, that's a lie, Dana. Decommissioning Durnford, Dana. Well, they said it's going to take at least 315 years. 315 years. Not 316, not 314 years, but 315 years. It'll be hemorrhaging radiation then for 315 years. And there's not going to be nuclear scientists or nuclear academics or nuclear students doing it either, by the way. Rolls-Royce is taking away the opportunity for the country to have a future. What Rolls-Royce, with their fabled fake mini nuclear reactors that don't exist, is they're destroying the future of the country. Not trying to make a profit, they're trying to make the country self-destruct. Indigenous have to go out and rally against South Australia. They do this a lot, don't they, where they put SA there instead of the word Australia? South Australia nuclear dump in Kimba, which is prime farmland, for goodness sakes. There's this incredible fetish with the nuclear industry to constantly poison farmland. Their deep geological repository they're talking about is for medical nuclear waste. So why do you need a deep geological repository, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of feet under the ground, for something that you inject in humans and is going to cure them? Why don't you just dump it in the drinking water if it's going to cure you? Because it doesn't cure you, it kills you. So the natives are gonna too, which is the only ones in Australia with a pair of balls, apparently. An indigenous group fighting the construction in a... Like, why are you constructing it in a farmer's prime farmland? The natives weren't allowed to vote on it when they originally had the poll, which was segregated to a little tiny community, when the whole country should participate in that conversation because everybody loses. The idea, by the way, is to have this controversy so that eventually the people will say, no, we don't want the nuclear dump. So then they spend another decade or two looking for another place where they know people are going to say no, because they don't want to build a repository, because there's lots of nuclear wastelands where they can stick it. From the United Kingdom traveling all the way to Australia to set off their nuclear weapons. Oh, and they waited for the wind to blow across Australia before they set off their dirty bombs and nuclear weapons. They detonated over 700 nuclear dirty bombs with conventional explosives of plutonium and uranium-235 fission products. So evil it defies any kind of reality. If I didn't know nothing about nuclear, I'd say, well, no, that's not true. They wouldn't do that. The universities would speak up. Journalists would say this is outrageous. No, and if you know anything about this stuff, you'll laugh at anybody who thinks that way, when you should, and you should try to help educate them. The Kimba dump site, they're even calling it a dump site now, Kimba, which is prime farmland. And they got a farmer there, they gave him 4 times the value of his land, so they knew the rest of the community now would hate his guts, and then eventually it would all fall apart, because that's what they want to do. But the natives were excluded from the vote. Who owns the land? They actually own the land. And they weren't allowed to vote. Only the white man was allowed to vote. Tell me that's not racist and bigoted and prejudice and bias. Beam Global receives order for nuclear waste management site for multiple solar EV charging systems. So, a nuclear waste management site, this is San Diego. I don't know if that's where it's to. I can't remember. This is I just wanted to show this one because it's a really cool system. It's expensive, unfortunately, like $60,000. Let me see if I can find the best ones. Well, I'll just walk you. I want to show you what it actually looks like, and then it's easier to appreciate. So, you see the big deck there? So the deck actually ends up on the floor. So this is one big piece. The deck, those little pieces are the charging port. On top of it is solar panels. So that has storage too, by the way. But the deck, you're going to drive right on the deck. So it comes as this one big unit. You're actually physically going to park your car on that deck. So it's very mobile. You can pick it up and bring it somewhere else. It's all contained. It's not connected to the grid. But just for those out there who are looking for these types of ideas. And so they say they can charge up to 6 cars at a time with this single unit, and electric bikes, of course. But you can bring it and drop it off anywhere. And if you're renting the property, when you go to your next property, you can just stick it on a trailer and move it to your next spot. There's 60,000. They have storage on it, so you can charge at night. And the price will come down eventually, right? As they're now starting to mass produce it. As they start selling lots, the price will start coming down. But it all fits in a small trailer. That's pretty impressive. So you can move it anywhere. I really like stuff like this, right? That are game changers. So let's put one right there. And so they do. They just bring it in, drop it off, it's up and running. It comes fully charged. It's up and running immediately. And so it's 64,000. Also, you can plug in external things to it. So it has like a 30 amp chargers, obviously. And 120 and 220, 240. That's pretty cool, I thought. So it'll be, because it holds a charge, you can store it, you can charge at nighttime too, right? And it's good for 120, I think he said 120 miles per hour wind, that it still won't get destroyed, even in hurricanes and typhoons. So pretty interesting technology. And I like the idea, everything is right there. It's all self-sustained. So that's another win for the planet, right? This kind of technology will, because you can put it anywhere. So you can have, like, if you got the route to Alaska, there's not a lot of charging stations, for instance, right? Going across deserts and stuff like this, you got charging stations and shade. What's not to like? How Germany is on track to fully transition to renewables in record time. Germany has been curb stomped for 11 years by the nuclear industry and its lapdog, the media. Germany has been accused of increasing coal consumption, so who cares? Coal's not going to exterminate the planet. Nuclear emissions will, though. Germany has been accused of increasing coal consumption to make up the nuclear shortfall, and that's nonsense. Investments in solar and wind put the country at the top of the list of countries based on the contribution of renewables to the total supply, and 46% in 2021, and a consistent and growing contribution over time, one that has resulted, contrary to myth, in an ever-increasing decline in coal consumption and a significant reduction in CO2. In 2013, coal accounted for 45% of electricity. In 2020, it fell to 24%. The reality is that it is on track to be the world's first economy to move away from fossil fuels. It's consuming less and less coal, consistently reducing its emissions, and is a net exporter of electricity, particularly to France. In short, a model for energy transition, expensive for sure, but cheaper than simply doing nothing, which is what the other countries that are complaining are doing. They're doing nothing. That's pretty clever. I love good stories like that. Here's a scary story. This is scary stuff, folks. So text-to-image technology, what happens if I tweet you, say, 6 words, and my car is broke down or something like that, 4 words. This software that I can put on my phone will create an image of a car broken down with the text. So if I write a story, everything that's descriptive, this thing will create an image that you have copyright to because it's a digital image. But that's a very slippery slope, right? You know, somebody creates an image of your husband or your girlfriend or your wife kissing somebody else, and tempers get out of control, for instance. Or the police want to frame you, or somebody wants to frame you for a crime. you're talking some serious, horrific implications. And this is now, Google said their version is too dangerous to release to the public. Which means what? They're releasing it to the industry? Because there's a difference between releasing it to the public and not releasing it. There really is. And it's significant. Particularly with Google, who have the resources and the engineers. They can put 10,000 in computer engineers on a problem and come up with a solution, right? Software can create unbelievable pictures based on a few text inputs and has led to the spread false imaging already on social media. There is a company out there that has released it. We're now officially in the Wild Wild West. Yeah, Alaska's closing the snow crab and king crab. And their snow crab was decimated. We covered that a couple of months ago. It totally disappeared. So this AI text to image is frightening. I forgot about that. I didn't mean to have that in there. Thumbs down for Durnford is a grotesque attack on environmentalists. Wednesday, the 21st of September, 2016 goes down as the darkest hour in the total eclipse for justice in Canada and the environmental cause throughout the Northern Hemisphere. The guilty verdict against Dana Durnford is a perversion of the legal norms that condemns the Canadian government to being a great banana republic of the North in slavish servitude to the global nuclear industry and its own uranium mining profiteers. Canada is captured in the 70s by the nuclear industry. We don't have a country. The greatest beneficiary of these heinous court decisions are Japan's investors in the Canadian uranium, which is Canada's one of the biggest uranium exporters on the planet, including TEPCO and Hitachi, General Electrics, which are the very source of the radioactive death curse along the western coast and in the atmosphere of North America and across the Arctic regions. And while a sentence of 3 years probation with 6 gag orders for 3.5 years is an overt attempt to muzzle his criticism in regards to the effect of Fukushima radioactive releases. So was that phone call earlier, right? Crimps any donations for his scientific research and has a chilling effect on the anti-nuclear cause and the larger environmental movement, along with dampening the concern of the affected residents in Western Canada. The long, dragged-out legal proceedings followed by probations and gag orders are part of a strategy of intimidation against the Canadian public living under a nuclear cloud of denial of cancer and other radioactivity-linked disorders. And 3 years is a critical duration in time, ending as it will on the cusp of the radioactive 2020 Tokyo Olympics. The rig prosecution in Vancouver has proven one thing only, that beyond a shadow of a doubt, Canada's authentic ecology hero is Dana Durnford, who has emerged as a role model for global environmentalists. And friend, colleague, and brother, I salute you for those intrepid ocean research voyages. and for your boundless courage in defense of all of the world's precious species, great and small, including our own. Life will triumph eventually, thanks to your personal sacrifices and deep knowledge of the sea. And let us all stand together with you to protect life on this fragile planet. Yoshi Shimatsu is a forensic journalist and former Sunday editor of Japan Times. I had done a weekly radio show with Yoshi and Jeff Rintz for 2 years when I was back home. It's a short. I wasn't going to do a show tonight. Get some music going there. And I had a terrible 3 days. The last 3 days have been just terrible. And we'll see everybody tomorrow night. Hopefully tomorrow will be a good day. The last 3 have been horrible. God bless everybody. Hugs for everybody. Have a great night and a great day tomorrow. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. We'll come back and curb stomp this despicable, disgusting nuclear industry. God bless everybody, and hugs for you and your friends and your loved ones. Tell your loved ones you love them. You never know. Yeah, I know I'm looking better. I lost a loved one the weekend on Friday. Good night, everybody.